31, I'm going to convene our Palo Alto City Council meeting of the October 2nd, 2023. Madam Clerk, will you shall I have Councilmember Tanaka announce or after we take roll?
Councilmember Tanaka just signed on. Councilmember Tanaka, do you have any announcement to make regarding your virtual attendance?
Yeah, I have a cough, so I'm not going to be attending in person.
He has a cough. I hope you feel better.
Councilmember Tanaka will be invoking his just cause provision of the AB 2449. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you take roll, please?
Yes. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames?
Here.
Councilmember Vinker?
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka?
Here.
Councilmember Burt?
Here.
Councilmember Lowing?
Here.
Vice Mayor Stone?
Here.
Mayor Koo?
Here.
For the record, all present.
Thank you. So today, this meeting is called to order in honor of Italian American Heritage Month and Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I would also like to ask for a moment of silence to remember Senator Dianne Feinstein. So if we can just take a moment, please. Thank you.
Councilmember Tanaka, as part of AB 2449, can you please disclose if there are any adults 18 and over in the room with you?
None.
All right, thank you.
All right, very good. And now we move to our special orders of the day. It's a proclamation recognizing National Fire Prevention Week. That's the week of October 8th through the 14th, 2023. And I have Councilmember Venker. Will you please read the proclamation?
Thank you, Mayor Koo. It is my honor to read the proclamation for Fire Prevention Week 2023. Whereas the city of Palo Alto is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in, working in, and visiting the community, and whereas cooking is the leading cause of home fires, with nearly half of all home fires involving cooking equipment, cooking is also the leading cause of home fire injuries. Unattended cooking is the leading cause of home cooking fires and half of the related deaths. And whereas all household members should develop and practice a home fire escape plan that includes 2 exits from every room in the house, a path to the outside from each exit, smoke alarms in all required locations, and a meeting place outside where everyone in the home will meet upon exiting. And whereas the City of Palo Alto Fire Department first responders are dedicated to reducing the occurrence of home fires and home fire injuries through prevention and education. And whereas the 2023 Fire Prevention Week theme, quote, "Cooking safety starts with you, pay attention to fire prevention," unclose, quote, effectively serves to educate the public about simple but necessary steps they can take to help reduce the risk of fire when cooking at home, keeping themselves and those around them safe. Now, therefore, Mayor Lydia Koo of the City of Palo Alto, on behalf of the entire City Council, does hereby proclaim October 8th through 14th, 2023 as Fire Prevention Week throughout this community, and urges all the people of Palo Alto to participate in the many public safety activities and efforts of the City of Palo Alto Fire and Emergency Services during Fire Prevention Week 2023.
Thank you, Councilmember Vinker. And Chief Blackshire, would you like to say some words?
Greetings, Mayor and Council, Geo Blackshire, Fire Chief in Palo Alto. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about Fire Prevention Week. Fire Prevention Week started as a commemoration of the Chicago fire in 1872, and it was first observed in 1922, but President Coolidge did a proclamation where he made, in 1925, made Fire Prevention Week a national observance, making it the longest running public health observance in the country. So I thought that was pretty cool, and you might want to know that. As previously mentioned, this year's campaign is Cooking Safety Starts With You. Pay attention to fire prevention. It always has to have some kind of rhyme scheme in there. I've noticed that since I've been doing this part, I always have to, I'm curious about who comes up with these rhyming themes. I actually want to see if I can be a part of that. I have no idea how to do that, but I'm gonna look into it. To promote fire prevention, a couple of things we're doing. We talked about the events that are happening. So we're going to re-engage the elementary schools with the fire safety poster contest. And you've seen from years ago, we still have some of the winners in the entrance to the council chambers. So we're gonna start that up again. We're gonna put the announcement to the schools this month, and we'll be going through the judging and presentation in early 24 for the winners. And then we'll have a host of new posters and winners of fire prevention and fire safety in the council chambers. Also, on October 14th, there will be an open house at Fire Station 3. That's the Rinconada Fire Station. And so there'll be an open house where residents can tour the fire station. It is our newest fire station that opened during COVID. So the community never really had an opportunity to see the fire station and tour and meet their neighborhood firefighters at that station. So next Saturday, or Saturday after next, on the 14th, there will be an open house. We'll have art activities there with partnership with CSD and the Art Center for kids, and we'll be showing off and showing our equipment, meeting the people. It'll be a great time. So I invite the community to come out to the Rinconada Fire Station on that day and meet their neighborhood firefighters. And I also meant to mention that that poster contest goes back about over 20 years now. We've been doing that. So we had a pause during COVID, but this is like a reinvigorating opportunity to get that thing going. So again, really appreciate the proclamation. It's really important. The residents and community of Palo Alto, they're really the first line of defense in preventing fires. And so on our website, we'll have links, and we'll be giving out material to help community be a part of the solution and prevention in our efforts to make this a very meaningful event. So thank you so much for that.
Are we going to be able to see Smokey the Bear at the fire station open house?
You know what? If you want Smokey the Bear, we'll go get one out there. I don't know if it might be a small, the stuffed animal you can sleep with at night, but if you want Smokey the Bear, we'll see what we can do. We'll get him out there.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Did you want to take a picture with the council?
Extinguisher in hand.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, and thank you to our firefighters as well. Our next is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. I think we do have a deletion. Assistant manager. At agenda changes.
The revised agenda, thank you, Mayor Koo, Assistant City Manager Kylie Nose here on behalf of City Manager Ed Chicada. So the revised agenda has already gone out, so there are no additional revisions to tonight's agenda. The study session has been pulled and will be agendized at a later date.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to public comments on items that are not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you?
Our first speaker is Aram J.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I just wanted to say, I think it was last week or the week before, I discussed the city manager's report of Monday, September 18th, 2023, which was number 11 on the calendar, Independent Police Auditor Report of Review of Investigation as of June 1, 2023, and Police Use of Force Report for January through June of 2023. Today, I'd like to make a request of the city attorney, Molly Stump, that in reference to all of the pointed firearm incidents listed in that report, I'm making a Public Records Act. I want to be able to see the body-worn footage of each of those incidents, as well as the footage from the patrol vehicles. In addition, I'm still asking yet again for the October 10th, 2021 dog mauling of Alexander Furrier. I would like the video of that, the 36-second dog mauling. Transparency in government is so critical, particularly with law enforcement, as we've talked about so many times before, who have the ability to take your life. Not many other city employees have that ability to do that, or police do. I'm particularly concerned with the incident that Mike Chinaco's report discussed on page 6 of the city manager's report, vehicle pursuit, pointed firearm, foot pursuit. Now that involved an African-American woman who is alleged to have engaged in a theft at the mall. She gets in her car. Now, if you read it carefully, she's in her car, she gets out of her car. She gets out of her car before the car is ever put into reverse and allegedly hits the patrol vehicle. The officer points the gun at her. Given the history of traffic stop incidents that lead to the death of African Americans, what she did makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? She backed in and tried to escape before she was shot by this officer. As you know, the officer chases the African-American woman in her vehicle for approximately 2 minutes. The car rolls over, and what does he do? He goes up not to offer aid, but points the gun a second time. Once she's taken into custody, there's a gratuitous comment. I'm assuming that she had handcuffs on at that time by the same officer. It's not that hard to get into a fucking car. Wow. Isn't that over the top? And isn't that racially loaded? And yeah, I want to see that video. And you should want to see it too. And you should tell Andrew Binder you have the authority to release it. You don't have to, but you have the discretion to do that. So again, this thing doesn't come back onto the calendar until October 16th. Take a
That concludes public comment on items not on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now we move to council member questions, comments, and announcements. Does any council member have any announcements? Councilmember Burt.
Well, I have both a question and a comment. We have on Wednesday the special council meeting that's going to receive a briefing from staff on proposed zoning code amendments to implement the housing element. And the staff report that we have so far says that materials will be distributed on Wednesday. I was both wanting to understand why materials can't be distributed before then, and request that they be so. We've had this is coming forward as a result of input, I think, from the Housing Element Committee preceding it going to the PTC. But is there some reason that we won't be having the materials until the 4th? I personally, I don't feel I'll be as prepared to have a thoughtful discussion of the item without having been able to review materials in advance.
Assistant City Manager.
Sure. Thank you for the question, council member. The plan for Wednesday night is just a briefing from staff. So staff is not expecting council to be prepared to have a lively discussion over the materials. It's an opportunity for us to present materials to council in concert with the dissemination of the PTC materials and have that dialogue, including an opportunity for public comment. So really, it is kind of similar to how when the budget is released, and we very much have not expected council to have reviewed the budget yet, but we're providing a transmittal of and kind of going over the high levels. That is what the plan will be for Wednesday.
And so, well, when we have the budget briefing, we actually do have opportunities for the council to provide initial feedback that goes to the finance committee and is then used by the finance committee as a framing for additional discussions. Are you saying that this is a briefing and there won't be any discussion and no feedback from the council at this meeting?
Sure, of course, it's the council's discretion. It will be agendized as a study session, but this is at the front end of the process. The materials will ultimately be moving through PTC and our normal processes, and will ultimately end up at council, but this is just including council at the beginning and the end.
Well, I would be interested in hearing from colleagues on whether they also feel that they would be able to have a more meaningful participation on Wednesday if we receive some of these materials in advance, whatever materials are going to be presented. Presumably, they're not being prepared at the very last minute.
Would the Housing Ad Hoc Committee members like to speak to this or answer Councilmember Burt's question? Go ahead, Councilmember.
Yeah, I think the assistant city manager pretty much recapped it, that the sort of understanding of what are some of the possibilities for the city as it goes to PTC is the first step. The consideration from the ad hoc and the city was it'd be good to have the whole council, see this and think about it a bit. The fallback was to just do an ad hoc public meeting like this for the same purposes. And it's not clear that there's going to be a staff report other than just slides from the director of planning and the consultant.
Vice Mayor Stone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just another piece that the ad hoc and staff thought was very valuable was giving the public an opportunity to be able to share their thoughts after hearing staff's presentation. We understand, given the constraints of the timeline, that's going to be basically in real time, that council is receiving that as well. But the ad hoc had a discussion. We could either hear community feedback at that meeting between the two of us, or open it up for the full council to be able to hear it. So I think we recognize that this is sort of out of order typically, but but some of the zoning changes that are being considered are relatively significant. We thought that the more opportunities for the public to be able to be engaged and for us to be able to hear from them early on in this process was going to be more meaningful and beneficial than just going the typical process where none of us would see this. Well, anyone not on the housing element would see this until November. So that was the thinking.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Stone. Do you have more?
Yes. So these are materials that the ad hoc committee has already reviewed. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what we have here is the ad hoc committee is having input to the PTC. Basically, they will have reviewed them, but the balance of the council will not have had that opportunity to provide any feedback, even if it's not going to be action feedback. I understand that, but like a study session, and like we do for the budget, the balance of the council, I would hope would have some opportunity to provide feedback, just as the ad hoc committee is.
Madam Attorney.
Right. So although Councilmember Lang did acknowledge some exposure to the material just in concept, and as Vice Mayor Stone stated, this material is really being prepared in real time. And Madam Mayor, we're kind of coming to the edge of the discussion that we can have under this item. I think the point has been heard, but we need to move on.
Okay. So does that help with the response? Somewhat.
Well, I remain
Right.
disagreeing with the notion of not providing whatever materials we have in advance.
Okay, taken. Councilmember Vinker?
My light was on actually about a separate item, but I don't know if you're asking about comment on this because
This is actually on council comments, questions, and announcements
yes, okay. So we're moving on from
from,
Okay.
yes.
No, I just thought it would be nice to report to our residents that you, Madam Mayor, and Councilmember Burt and I attended the League of California Cities Conference and received updates on what the league is doing with respect to advocacy and programs and educational opportunities for council members and residents across our state. And there were quite some interesting sessions, and the Peninsula Division of the California League of Cities had a breakfast, and we were able to meet with other council members and mayors in our region. And a senior staffer from HCD, from the state HCD office, came and spoke a bit about some of the programs and things that they are offering to support cities in achieving the programs and goals of their housing elements. So it was, I thought, quite a useful trip.
Thank you, Councilmember Vinker. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had rung in actually because I had a question on Councilmember Burt's matter, and I think it is simply a procedural question, so I'd like to ask it and cut me off if it's inappropriate. For me, it really speaks to the volume of materials that are coming before us. I have a hard time digesting things in the moment if they exceed a certain number of pages. So if it's a 50-page report, it seems absurd that we would not get it in advance. If it's a 5-page report, I can certainly handle it in advance. I'm guessing it might be a 20-page report. I don't know, but that would be the only reason that I view to give us the opportunity to read something so that we can properly discuss the item, ask the pertinent questions. It's really the volume of the material being presented and the length of time.
Very good. I have,
I did have another matter. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay, go
Sorry.
ahead.
I wanted our colleagues to be aware that 3 of us sit on the Stanford Ad Hoc Committee. That's Mayor Koo, Councilmember Burt, and myself. And we are meeting approximately monthly with our colleagues in land use and real estate and external affairs at Stanford to discuss issues of potential common concern and cooperation, such as land use and transportation. I may be leaving out some topics. Councilmember Burt or Mayor Koo, feel free to fill the others in.
Do you want to add some, Councilmember Burt? Just to advise
Yes,
our
well,
colleagues.
and the most immediate issue is that the Stanford Community Plan is going before the County Board of Supervisors in 2 weeks.
October 17th.
October 17th, thank you. And it just went to the County Planning and Transportation Commission. We submitted a letter last year and had a meeting. The ad hoc committee had a meeting with county staff and Supervisors Simidian and Chavez 2 weeks ago, approximately, to kind of review some of the most important parts of that letter. And we wanted to make sure that colleagues were aware of this important issue coming up. We've been very appreciative of the work that Supervisor Simidian has done to really try to make sure that Stanford's community plan reflects the needs and interests of the surrounding community. And it really has been groundbreaking in terms of defining those obligations for Stanford, based upon the tri-party agreement and otherwise that between Palo Alto, Stanford, and the university. And within that plan, probably the most significant outstanding issue that we have as a city is the proposal that up to 30% of the housing that Stanford would be obligated to provide for principally for faculty and staff could be provided on Stanford-owned lands contiguous to the academic lands, which are effectively Palo Alto lands, primarily the research park, and secondarily others in the potentially in the Quarry Road area. The concerns that we raised were really twofold. If Stanford built significant housing that was exclusive for their employees, it would mean that that housing, say in the research park, which we've wanted to explore, including on housing sites and our housing element, would be not for the general public in Palo Alto, but for actually non-Palo Alto residents on academic that or would otherwise be non-Palo Alto residents, and basically exclusively for one private entity. Secondarily, when we've had discussions around the tax ramifications that are even being disputed by Stanford in certain ways, but it's pretty clear that rental housing off campus that is dedicated for Stanford employees, even market rate rental housing, is exempt from property tax and affecting our revenue for our schools and our city. And so that's the one outstanding issue. I don't know if staff has any report out on the County Planning Commission meeting. I believe that City Manager Shikata even perhaps spoke at that meeting. And I see in the Post reporting that there were planning commissioners who took a slightly different position from the county staff recommendation, but it's not clear to me whether that was a commission recommendation or individual commissioners, but the position was advocating for a percentage of that housing to be able to be provided with in lieu fees. And what wasn't clear from the reporting is whether that is just focused on affordable housing, whereas the community plan housing is not limited to affordable housing off campus. It's market rate and or affordable. And just so we all understand that the current structure has been that Stanford pays in lieu fees for affordable housing in lieu fees for the additional academic office development that they've done. And those fees actually were a significant part of what we in the county used to save Buena Vista. So the intention, as I understand it, is that the city would be making some comments to the supervisors in writing and in person on that date, and they would be based upon a version of the letter that we sent previously.
And perhaps maybe staff might want to send a letter from September 14th, 2022 that Councilmember Burt had written to the whole council so that they're aware of what the letter is all about. I can forward to you later. On my announcements, I want to thank the Neighbors Abroad team for working on the our sister city Albi's visit. It was very nice meeting the delegations from Albi. Also, there was a generous donation by Green Waste and the city of Palo Alto of a garbage truck to our sister city of Oaxaca. This furthers Oaxaca's recycling goals. Now they have a garbage truck to do that with. Also, October 1 was Nigeria's Independence Day. I want to congratulate Parks and Recreation Commissioner Joy Ocha for organizing the Independence Day event and featuring a lot of the Nigerian traditions and culture. Also, Palo Alto's Lawn Bowling Club celebrated their 90th anniversary in Palo Alto. Congratulations to them also. I too attended, as Councilmember Vinker said, the League of California City Sessions. I did attend a lot of the sessions, but there were two that stood out, which is navigating the new state housing laws, which featured a lawyer from a law firm, as well as a director from a city, and also the Deputy Director of Housing Policy Development of the Housing and Urban Development Agency, HCD as we know it. And, really a lot of the things that they said did not pertain to what was indicated in the guide. Things like it did not help us understand much of their state housing laws that they have put forward, over 100 of them. The other agency was HCD's Housing Accountability Unit. And basically, to understand how to be in compliance with the HCD's in our housing element, basically simply approve all the projects that come before you, then you'd be in compliance. I don't see how that is going to be helpful. In any case, lots going on. There's a lot of things that the league is talking about. They talk a lot about local control and retaining and preserving it, but the action has been very lacking. So otherwise, it was great to meet up with other council members and hear about what they're experiencing in their towns. And that's about it, I think, for me. And with that, it concludes our council questions, announcements, and comments, and we move to the consent calendar. Do we have any raised hands or a motion? Okay, I will move the consent calendar. Can I get a second?
Second.
Councilmember Lowing, second. And I see a hand from Councilmember Tanaka.
No on 6.
Councilmember Tanaka, no on 6.
Mayor Ku,
Any-
just a reminder for public comment.
Yes, thank you.
However, there are no requests to speak and no hands are raised.
Awesome. With that, will you please take roll?
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
Mayor Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott Hames,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka, would you like to speak on your no vote on 6?
Yeah, thank you. This is a substantial cost increase. It went from about $6 million a year, or $6 million for the contract period, to 13 million, so more than double. As we know, we are running a budget deficit this year. We're taking money out of our budget stabilization reserve, and we're taking even more now. One thing I found disturbing about the report is, usually it actually says what the range of bids were. But in this case, it didn't. So I wasn't sure, was this the highest bid or lowest bid, but probably it's the highest bid because it didn't say. But it would be good if the report did say that. And for some of the reasons to justify the cost increase, it says, well, we're going to do landscaping service on the weekend, which is why the weekend? Why not just do the weekday like everyone else? So I guess I just couldn't understand the justification for the cost increase. So I can't support this.
Thank you, Councilmember Tanaka. And with that, we conclude the consent calendar, and we'll move to city manager comments.
Thank you, City Council. Oh, that doesn't move. Again, Kylie Nose, Assistant City Manager here filling in for City Manager Shikata for the evening. All right, next slide, please. We are pleased to announce that starting tomorrow, we are increasing our hours for library services at the College Terrace and downtown libraries. They'll now be open on Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. This does restore to the downtown and College Terrace locations to either pre-pandemic or beyond pre-pandemic levels of service. And ultimately, between now and the end of the year, we are expecting to continue to increase library service hours at Mitchell Park, Brinkenada, and Children's Library locations. Next slide, please. So beginning on January 1st, 2024, the city will have a new minimum wage. And ultimately, we've included this since per our code, we do notice this as of October 1st. So we have publicly notified on our website, our minimum wage website below, you can see at cityofpaloalto.org/minimum wage, where we've posted this. There are flyers available for businesses to download in both English and Spanish. And ultimately, per our ordinances, our minimum wage is updated every January based on the CPI. And this is ultimately for any employee that's performing 2 hours or more of work. Next slide. As you heard from our chief earlier this evening, this is Fire Prevention Week coming up October 8th through the 14th. And in alignment with that, the city is having a Palo Alto Fire Department open house on Saturday, October 14th at Fire Station 3. So here you'll be able to participate in activities, learning how to prevent fires, connect with the fire department staff between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Additional details on this can be found on the city's webpage and ultimately on the city's calendar. So during October, there are a number of engagements and events that the public and community are encouraged to attend. Ultimately, on our homepage, there's a news article or a webpage basically highlighting all of those events that are being offered. You can find additional information on things like the National Hispanic Heritage Month, Halloween, Dias de los Muertos celebrations, and below are a few highlights. The one thing to note is there has been a slight change. If you've noticed on the calendar, the Sibling City Town Hall on Climate, which was previously scheduled for Sunday, October 8th, has been moved on that calendar until December 3rd. So you will see that that's changed. Additional upcoming events are the celebration of the new California Dinosaur Garden at our JMZ. We have Code Art coming. I think many of you probably enjoyed this in previous years, taking over the University Avenue area. There's an electric home tour coming in October 14th. And ultimately, our last town hall for this calendar year is scheduled for October 15th. And this is for the areas of Midtown and Palo Verde. Notable upcoming agenda items, obviously under council comments, we heard on Wednesday, we do have a special meeting with the council. This is new. It was noticed last Friday about the zoning code amendment, specifically around the housing element. So that'll be a briefing for the council and the public. October 16th, we have our semi-annual discussion with the police auditor. We also are looking at the public discussion for Cubberley site options and a proposed cities association joint powers of authority item. October 23rd, there's an SUMC development agreement amendment, and beginning in November, 2 council priorities are coming back with the rental registry program and the car-free streets. And with that, that concludes my comments for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lithcott Haynes, did you want to say some? You like? No, okay, so that's a leftover light. With that, we're gonna go to our break and we should be back about 6:25. is an action item, and that's to receive the Human Relation Commission's recommendation on the evaluation and celebration of additional dates to advance race and equity, including through city recognition and city-paid holidays, and provide direction to staff on further actions.
Good evening, Mayor Koo and council members. Minka Vanderswag, Manager, Office of Human Services, and I'm pleased to be joined tonight by Adriana Eberly. She is the Vice Chair of the Human Relations Commission. Next slide. So we are here this evening to give a report back to the council on the referral that you passed on to us for looking into ways of evaluating and celebrating dates to advance equity and race in the community. So that's what we have before you tonight. So this came before you the first time in March of 2022 as a colleague's memo. And at that time, there were several recommendations that were made. And among them were 3 that involved the Human Relations Commission. So the first thing you asked the commission to do was look at how best to recognize and celebrate the dates that you identified that night. And that was Juneteenth, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, and Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. You asked the HRC to evaluate recognition of the addition of Holocaust Remembrance Day and Armenian Remembrance Day. And you asked them to evaluate if October 11th at that point was the specific day, which was the second Monday in October, and if that should be redesignated as Italian Heritage Day. So the HRC discussed this at length at 3 meetings in 2022. And one of their recommendations already came back to you. That was the renaming or the naming of the second Monday in October as both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. And you made a decision upon that recommendation that it was the will of the council to name that day Indigenous Peoples Day and Italian Heritage Day. So I will turn it over to Vice Chair Eberly, and she will go over the bulk of the HRC recommendation.
Good evening. So the way that we approached our task was to to discuss how best to recognize and celebrate the holidays listed in the council motion. We then evaluated the addition of Holocaust Remembrance Day and Armenian Remembrance Day for local recognition, and make a recommendation as to whether October 11th, which is really the second Monday of October, should be redesignated as Italian Heritage Day. Based on that, we took the following actions. The ad hoc committee decided to come up with a framework, which then was presented to the whole commission. So establish a standard framework for when considering city recognition activities and to address the days of significance the council requested direction on. And the reason we decided to do a framework is because we thought it would be helpful to city staff in the future when you had questions about, future dates. There's the next slide. So our framework was, so consider and utilize the standard framework for consideration of city recognition of events, individuals, and celebrations. So we decided to come up with categories. We discussed them at length, and these are the categories that we came up with. And then I'll go through the categories in the description. So calls to service, service events, days of service, celebration of people or events that are a match to the promotion of service within the community. Another category, time of celebration of people, events, and or issues. Another category, awareness days, months, to bring forth awareness of social issues that affect the community. Days of remembrance, city recognition of significant past events and or persons. And then affinity group celebrations, recognition of different groups and their times of celebration. Next slide. We also came up with a process for submission of consideration. We decided that we wanted to allow for multiple entry points. So we thought it would be nice if council could initiate it, community could initiate, it could also be staff initiated or commission initiated. And then the types of approval would be commission recommendation to council, staff approved, council approved. We also, part of the framework was to come up with levels, and then we have the description of the levels. So the base level would be a proclamation, certificate of recognition. The mid-level would be medium level of staff financial resources required, such as co-sponsorship, division department level assistance, other local resources available, partners available. And then the highest level, the high level would be significant level of staff financial resources required and multiple departments involved. Now, it's important to note that we discussed this and we wanted to make sure the council realized that the level of recognition refers to the level of city staff, work, partners' involvement. This is something that we took into account because obviously not every day could be highest level. So it has to do with the city involvement and it does not correlate to the significance of the event. Next slide. So I'll go through these. So these were so to summarize, we came up with this framework and then we went through all the dates that were given us and discussed them as we put them into the framework. And these were our results. And obviously council is free to use the framework or not, but this is what we did and this is what we came up with. So Juneteenth, June 19, our recommendation is to add to the city's paid holidays and to join East Palo Alto in annual celebration events. And I'd like to point out that that is a federal holiday as it stands right now. Cesar Chavez, which is March 31, and Dolores Huerta, April 10, we decided to merge them together and add March 31, which is already state recognized as Cesar Chavez Day. Added to the city's paid holidays and recognize both Cesar Chavez Day and Dolores Huerta Day on the same day. City to connect with local Latinx and women's groups to support and create awareness of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta Day. Next one was Indigenous Peoples Day, the second Monday in October. Our recommendation was to recognize as both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. I know that council rejected that already, and it is now designated as Indigenous Peoples Day and Italian Heritage Day. But our recommendation was for city to connect with local indigenous groups to support existing activities and to create new ones, such as a land acknowledgement ceremony at City Hall. Next one is Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Month, which is May. City to connect with local AANHPI affinity groups to support existing activities and possibly create new ones. Palo Alto Library and Palo Alto Council of Parent Teacher Association, PTAC, also produce AANHPI awareness events. So we thought those would be good opportunities to partner up. Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27. City to connect with local Jewish affinity groups to support existing activities and possibly create new ones. Yeah, and then Armenian Remembrance Day, April 2nd, city to provide a proclamation. Next slide.
So that comes to the staff recommendation, and that is to receive the Human Relations Commission's recommendations, responding to your referral to them, and provide direction to staff on the implementation of these recommendations, and including if you want to further pursue any of them, which are subject to the meet and confer as necessary. And to refer the standard framework and procedure for considering city recognition of events to staff for further review and refinement. That ends our report, and we turn it back to you and look forward to the discussion.
I want to start by saying thank you to the Human Relations Commission, Vice Chair Ebeli, as well as Ms. van der Swag for the work that you did on this referral. And before we come back to council, I would like to make it available for public comments?
Our first speaker is Lynn C.
Madam Clerk, also, we might want to close public comments after the first speaker completes their comments.
Yes. Lynn, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak. All right. If you wish to submit public comment to the council, please email your comments to city.council@cityofpaloalto.org. We have no further requests to speak.
Thank you. That concludes public comments, and we'll come back to council for any questions and discussion of this report. Councilmember Lowing.
Thanks to the commission and staff for the extensive work. I know you say multiple meetings of commissions. I know what's involved in that. So very much appreciated for the right kind of effort, for the right kind of outcomes to recognize, these important things officially by the city. Connected with that, I have a question, which is, as you look at the gradation that was worked out and then assigned to certain holidays, do you have an estimate of what the incremental amount of work would be in a given year if all of this was accepted?
We did not specifically do that. I think a lot of that would depend on whether the partnerships for some of the events came through. I think, but we did not specifically go through each one and say this one will be 10 to 15 hours, this one will be that much. We did not do that, council member.
Okay, because each one of these says the city will, which means some resource has to drive it. So just kind of sensitive to that in terms of what we would be signing up for.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons that we talked about partnerships a lot, because we know that if you have a good partner, then the city won't have to devote as many resources. And it could be more of marketing the event, and publicity. So it's really going to depend on what kind of partners there are.
Okay, thank you, Mary. That was the only question I had.
Councilmember Byrd.
Thank you. So this is appreciated that the HRC did such in-depth work and kind of trying to propose a rationalized framework for this. The original colleagues memo was one by that was initiated by Mayor Koo and myself. And one of the questions that I have with the recommendation to have two specific paid holidays that would be added to the city paid days. As a result of our previous action, we had basically created if I recall correctly, and I'm going to turn to the assistant city manager to clarify this, created an additional holiday that had a discretion on the use date, and so this proposal is to well, why don't you review that context, if you would?
Sure. As noted in the staff report, the city did enter into labor agreements with all of its employee groups between the time that this was referred and obviously this action this evening. As part of those new contracts, as the staff report outlines, a new holiday, but a floating holiday was designated in those contracts. And that floating holiday was one for days of significance that the employee could then choose their day to recognize of significance in alignment with them and their personal lives. Now, this action would, or the HRC's recommendation is to add 2 identified and specific paid holidays. And so ultimately that would be something that we would move into labor negotiations with, depending on council's action this evening. But if that is something that the council wanted to implement, then that would actually return us to the tables. And we would recommend that we do that in this upcoming round of negotiations.
So one of the kind of key philosophical issues that I'm continue to struggle with is when we have city holidays versus other city actions and celebrations and recognition of a broader range of days. We're having the entirety of our city staff have that holiday, whereas we may have workers, city staff members who are would find it more important to have a day off for a Holocaust Remembrance Day or for Armenian Genocide Day, as opposed to one of the other dates. And if what we're attempting to do is really twofold, how we express this and recognize this to our citizenry as a whole, and what we're recognizing and expressing to our workers. And so that's where I'm still torn on whether we have the days that are not only that we have specific celebration and recognition, whether it's a paid city holiday or not, versus which dates we have this paid city holidays. And then in the on slide 6, it says that really 2 things that I had really pushed that that Dolores Huerta be really equally recognized with Cesar Chavez. And I think this has been something that has been a real error on throughout our state that has rightfully embraced the incredible historic impact of Cesar Chavez and underappreciated that he was a full partner with Dolores Huerta, who is still a fighter today for this, and who now 10 years ago was the keynote speaker on our City Hall Plaza as the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And so she is still someone who in our state, in our region, is with us, and it's well overdue for her to have that full co-equal recognition. And so I struggle with wanting to make sure that we don't that we assure that we co-recognize her. I will note that the United Farm Workers history is also underappreciated in that the UFW was ultimately partners with the Filipino Farm Labor Union, and the historically critical impact of civil rights that extended to the broad Hispanic community as a result of that initiative. There was a co-equal Asian American leadership in farm worker rights at that time that has been underappreciated. So when we look at um, the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander recognition. This is something that I want to call attention to, that we should look at how to be more conscious of that really important historic significance. And then the presentation also says recognize as both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. And did I understand it correctly that the HRC is recommending that we rather than have this Italian heritage, that we still recognize it as Columbus Day?
That was our recommendation, and it came to city council last year and it was rejected. I will say that it was a 2-1 vote.
Okay.
I personally wasn't for it, but that is what the commission as a whole passed.
Well, and we kind of had a compromise at the time. And when I had further reflection on Italian Heritage Day, I will say that as someone with Irish heritage, I would not advocate that St. Patrick's Day be an official holiday, or any of the innumerable other wonderful ethnic heritage significant dates that we have for the diverse community that we have in our city and our region, that we're looking at certain specific ancestries that we think we really want to call out and do an exceptional recognition for a series of reasons. So I'm not very. We as a culture had relatively recently adopted Columbus Day as a significant cultural heritage and holiday. I think it was an error at the time, and to the extent that we're continuing to call that out, it remains an error for our society and culture. I love Italy, and I love Italian heritage, but I don't think that there's a necessity to call that out as an exceptional honoring. And really, the reason it was called out was because Columbus led not only the European modern discovery of the Americas, but led a genocide as well, or the beginning of a genocide in the Americas. And to honor that was a mistake. It was an historic error that I don't think we should continue. So those are just some thoughts.
Thank you, Councilmember Burt. Councilmember Lithcutt Haynes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to affiliate myself or align myself with the beautiful remarks just made by Councilmember Burt. Thank you for that, colleague. I have a technical question about the extent to which Palo Alto's holidays, designated holidays, align with the federal and the California. I see the numbers that indicate the federal government has 11, California has 11, Palo Alto has 12. And I find myself wondering, what have we got that they don't have? Because I know they've got Juneteenth, which we don't have. So I'm wondering, is there a chart somewhere that shows the misalignment? Because it is nice to let other people do the work of figuring out which are the important dates.
Yes, I understand that. It's possible that HR Director Blanche has that department added to that section of the report to do the comparison to what Palo Alto had versus city, county, and federal. So I am not able to speak to that, but perhaps she is.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Sandra Blanche, HR Director. I don't have that in front of me, but my recollection is that the state has a floater similar to Palo Alto for Juneteenth.
the federal government has 11 designated holidays, one of which is Juneteenth. I'm wondering, it looks like we have an extra, perhaps an extra 2 since we don't recognize Juneteenth yet. So I'm just wondering what we've got that is already above and beyond what the feds and California is doing.
Sure. They're different. Under the federal holidays, the difference is the day after Thanksgiving. The federal holidays don't include that Friday after Thanksgiving. Our holidays do. At the state level, the difference is the second Monday of October, Columbus Day. So even the federal government and state are not in alignment.
So the state, you're saying, does not recognize the day after the second Monday?
It does not as a paid holiday.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. I forgot to thank you for your hard work. We appreciate you.
Okay, I wanted to ask similar lines with what Councilmember Lithcott-Hames was saying, that so the federal has 11 designated holidays plus a floater, or it's 10 plus a 10 plus a floater.
The federal does not have a floater. When excluding Juneteenth and Cesar Chavez Day, the federal has 10 holidays, as was referenced. It will be 11 if you include Juneteenth. Now, at the state level, the state has
11 designated holidays and 1 floating holiday.
because the state does not include, looks like the state doesn't include Juneteenth, but it does include Cesar Chavez Day and 1 personal floating holiday. So as you can see,
And now on
agencies are
our
not-
floating holiday, it's just for Juneteenth and Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, or no?
The floating holiday may be taken on any day that an employee chooses as a day of historical significance to them, ultimately with the appropriate supervisory approvals.
Oh, any day.
That's correct.
Oh. Okay.
I believe the state does have Juneteenth. Okay, yes. So Juneteenth is recognized by the state and Cesar Chavez Day is recognized by the state. Cesar Chavez Day not recognized as a federal holiday.
Okay. I also align myself with what Councilmember Burt said. It's really difficult to kind of determine about Columbus Day and Italian Heritage Day. And then also, I kind of thought that with Dolores Huerta celebrated on the same day as Cesar Chavez, kind of takes a little bit, the remembering and honoring of her, it lessens it, it seems.
That was a discussion specifically at the HRC. I heard them say, do we want to put the woman's holiday in with the man's holiday instead of, recognizing her specifically? My recollection is what Councilmember Burt said at the original meeting was that there was a real interest in recognizing the farm worker movement and her key role in it. And so ultimately the HRC decided that it would be a recognition of the farm worker movement with those 2 key leaders being recognized. So that's where they ended up. But there was a discussion whether it should be 1 day or 2 days. Do you have anything to add, Vice Chair?
Well, just that the HRC then recommended a paid holiday, so it would have been 2 paid holidays.
Yeah. Right. And of course, there's also the concern, with paid holidays, obviously there's the negotiation part, the meet and confer with employees, but also that adds adds more cost for us. And then we start running into other things like if we're closed, then we won't be able to conduct businesses. And if we're not aligned in our holidays with other municipalities, potentially other places could be conducting businesses and we're closed. So there's a lot of factors here to kind of consider, which is why I did like the suggestion of a floating holiday and for staff to determine which one suits them. And so, Assistant Manager, did you want us to, the two things is one is to receive the report. And then if there's anything actionable that council would like to do, then to move forward. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I see a light by Councilmember Vinker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Ku. And thank you very much, Director Vanderswag and Vice Chair Everly for bringing this to us tonight, and for the colleagues who brought the colleagues memo before I was here, and all the work that has gone into this. This is a really important topic, and a sensitive, delicate, and challenging topic as well. And I appreciate the thought that's gone into the framework to have many different ways that resources and interest and partners allow to recognize the important things in our collective heritage. So thanks for laying that out. The second recommendation was to refer that standard framework and procedure to staff for further review and refinement. I'm happy to do that. I like what I've seen so far, and so I commend you on that. The first one, though, is to receive the report, but also provide direction as to which to pursue, which of these recommendations to implement and pursue. And that's where I think we're struggling a little bit to make some tough decisions. Some of my thoughts so far, my notes. I'm struggling to find my notes on them, just one moment. So I think some of the comments that have gone before were insightful with respect to the second Monday in October. And, I wonder whether we ought to just call it Indigenous Peoples Day. That's what I would recommend. My children have significant Cherokee blood. I am, supportive of that day being named as such. I think Councilmember Burt was eloquent about why some of the others have drawbacks. And so that would be my thought on that. The Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez days, I do like Dolores having separate recognition. It is a challenge, though, that it does feel a little second class given her role. And I do think that perhaps some of the considerations others, including Mayor Ku, have mentioned about the floating holiday could perhaps address this to put them on similar standing. It's tough. We don't have enough holidays to go around, but I think if I kept up with the prior conversation about numbers, that there are 11 federal holidays. The state has one more in the form of a floating holiday, so 11 plus 1. And we right now have another one, which would be 12 plus 1 floating, giving the agreements we just negotiated this last round. So am I right so far that it's 11 at feds, state is 11 plus a floating, and we're 12 plus a floating? Is that
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Okay.
I do have staff in the, who's just clarified for us that for California, Juneteenth is not a paid holiday. It is a recognized holiday. So similar to Palo Alto, where state employees can take Juneteenth off in lieu of a personal holiday.
Okay.
So a floating holiday for the state also.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking is, it is a challenge to shut down the city essentially for an additional day. There is also an expense, but there's an operational and service oriented kind of expense. But to me, adding one, especially if it were Juneteenth, is something very important to do. But I wonder if then we could just add one instead of the two additional and keep the other as a floating holiday for people to take off the one that's most meaningful to them. But I also think that before we were even to make that decision, obviously we would have to meet and confer. And I would think we would want to meet and confer with labor because, we think that the paid holiday is what they want, but we need to ask. Perhaps there are other things in the bargaining process they might prefer, and they might prefer to include that as a floating holiday. Now, there are issues because of the degree of status of recognition, but I would love to have labor input on that. And I think that you've identified so many other things we can do that if once we knew what the druthers were or how the negotiations went with labor separately on whether they want additional paid holidays or perhaps some other benefit in the next round of meet and conferring, that would be illuminating. So I would want to refer that per the recommendation I'm not finding here. There we go. Too many pieces of paper. To be pursued in a meet and confer. So those are my thoughts on but I'm glad this is before us. This is an important discussion, and I'm glad our city is taking these recognitions so seriously.
Councilmember Lowing?
Yes, I want to go to my comments now, just to add to my question I had before. I think substantially what the commission has recommended can go back to staff for refinements as is. But I feel pretty strongly that the idea of now coming up with 2 more paid holidays is sort of out of scale and really sort of almost off the subject. I mean, you can celebrate a lot of holidays without taking the day off. Take an example, in our family, Halloween was always a big day. It was a big day, but we all worked that day and got off a little bit early and went out with the kids and all that. So, and I think the personal holiday that's already been added gives complete flexibility, which I think was great that was added. But I just don't see a linkage, a correlation between, a paid day off and that you can recognize and celebrate the holiday. And obviously, when you get back to how that impacts us, taking on $1.5 million of just lost labor plus all the backfill that we have to do to keep firemen on the trucks and police personnel in their cars and all that. I just think that's quite an unnecessary expense because I think you can still celebrate these holidays. So I'm not hearing any evidence that suggests to me that we should be adding that kind of cost. And I wouldn't at this point support either of those two. I'm pleased to hear that there's openness to change the last council recommendation relative to the Columbus Day and just go back to Indigenous People Day. I think that's a very solid recommendation, and was kind of frustrated to read that it hadn't been done already. So I think if we refine that, I think that would be great. I do think as the staff takes a look at this, you should try to get a little bit of an estimate of what this might cost and back off on some things or add some things just as you're planning this thing out. So I think I think it's good work, and the framework here, this part of the recommendation, I think we can make, and but I wouldn't include the 2 paid holidays for reasons stated. Thanks.
Just a clarification, we did change Columbus Day and replaced it with Indigenous People Day as well as Italian Heritage Day, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's, the Columbus Day is done.
Yeah, the Columbus Day is over, and it is Indigenous Peoples' Day and then Italian Heritage Day.
Okay, so thank you. Just a clarification. Vice Mayor Stone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks to staff and the HRC for discussion and the recommendation. Glad to hear the conversation tonight about the interest of removing Italian Heritage Day from the second Monday. For the new members, that really was a compromise last year during this discussion. I thought it was a wrong compromise for the reasons that Councilmember Burt stated. But also, historians are split between Columbus's heritage anyways. There's a divide whether he was Italian, Portuguese, or Spanish. More evidence recently has been pointing to Spanish. He couldn't even write in Italian. So I think we are honoring that day incorrectly, but don't need to get into more details there. Glad to see it seems like we're headed in that direction to just name it Indigenous Peoples Day and really honor the people that we should be honoring on that day and not a genocidal maniac. Regarding really the main issue though tonight, as far as the holidays, the 2 paid holidays, I'm torn on this issue. I tend to think, what can we be paying for with $735,000 every year, but trying to balance that with our interest in truly honoring these holidays as well. I think right now I'm looking at where we're at, and I think I'm developing a question here. As far as other local cities having 10 to 15 paid holidays, does that include floater holidays as well? Because the staff report kind of treated the floater holiday a little differently elsewhere. So those 10 to 15 for local cities, is that including floater holidays if they do floater holidays?
So Sandra can help us with this, but I will say they are varied.
That's my recollection too, is that it does vary. I can recall when we were discussing when we were in contract negotiations, it did just vary across the board. And
So ultimately though, some do have 15 designated holidays. Some do have as low as 10 designated holidays. And a number of them have anywhere between 1 to 4 floaters.
Okay, so the 15 paid holidays, that's the cap, even including
Correct.
floater holidays.
The agency that has 15 does not have any floaters.
Okay.
I'm sorry. If I just
Please.
may add, according to the staff report, though, when one accounts for both designated holidays and floating holidays, these same agencies range from 12 to 17 days, and Palo Alto has 13. So it goes up to 17 even.
Great, thanks for that clarification. So I mean, with us having 12 and 1 floater, I think an additional paid holiday is not inappropriate for us. And if we were to find an additional paid holiday, I can't think of a better option than Juneteenth. This is a holiday that really has been misunderstood or just a ignorance even around its existence for so long. And I think probably out of the BLM protests, an appreciation and understanding of Juneteenth and how meaningful of a holiday that is has really kind of come to light. And now we're being able to engage in these conversations thanks to the HRC and our community members. I do think the federal government recognizes Juneteenth and as a paid holiday itself right now. The state doesn't. I think that's a mistake. So I would be supportive of including Juneteenth as a paid holiday. But that would be, I think, the only paid holiday I think we should add at this time. And I agree with comments by colleagues as far as separating out Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta Day so that they both get the recognition that they deserve. So to get the conversation started, I'll make the staff motion, a couple of changes. Unless you already captured my comments in the motion that you're going to put on the screen. maybe you can separate, maybe 3 can be ended as paid holiday and then drop down, separate out Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez Day, just so there's no confusion as far as which one's going to be paid. And then 5 would be to remove Italian Heritage Day from the second Monday in October. Yes, and can you just include in October, the city will solely recognize Indigenous Peoples' Day on that date? Indigenous Peoples' Day.
And
And
I was going to say, Mayor and Vice Mayor, if there's a second, we might have some wordsmithing.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
okay, great. Yeah, a little clarification on 4. I'm just trying to indicate that it will not be a paid holiday, but we will celebrate it in the manner that the HRC, I think, suggested in their report, minus the paid holiday. So maybe for 4, recognize Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez Day as independent dates of significance. Great. We could just add day after Dolores Huerta.
Second.
Thank you. I hope this captured our discussion this evening. Open to modifications. I don't
Would
need to
you like
speak to this.
Speak to it?
No.
No. Councilmember Lithcott Haynes.
No need, thank you.
I see Councilmember Tanaka's hand, and he's been waiting a while. So Councilmember Tanaka?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you again to staff, HRC, the rep here, for your work on this. I do think Indigenous People Day seems like a better choice, so that makes sense. I even thought of some cities have done like Immigrant Day, so that covers a lot of people too. So almost everyone here is an immigrant, at least a descendant of immigrant. I've listened to my colleagues' conversation carefully, and I think I find myself pretty aligned to Councilmember Allowing on his thoughts. As we know, the city already gets every other Friday off. We already have residents tell us that it's hard to actually find a time when the city's actually open. We just gave raises, right, to everyone, everyone in the city, right? To take them above the median. So I think, we got that covered already. And the city already has very relatively rich benefits, right? I just looked this up. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, over 77% of civilian workers receive only 8 paid holidays a year. 8, okay. And so Palo Alto, we're at 13, right? So I think we're doing pretty good there. So I'm totally with trying to celebrate these other holidays, but as Councilmember Long said, that doesn't mean we have to put the city more in debt. We're already running a budget deficit, and where would the money come from to do this? Are we going to cut even more services to provide this? It doesn't seem appropriate. Yeah, and I think the other thing is that if we really want to celebrate these days, what I think we should do is we should just move a date from a different holiday then. And if that's important. And that also lets people know kind of it's really important, whether it's Juneteenth or whatever it happens to be. And I think there's also kind of a meet confer process too, right? So because I agree with all my colleagues, I'm not sure that more time off, because they already get a lot of time off, whether more time off is something that they rather have or some other perk, right? But we've already finished all the labor negotiations for multiple years. So I guess to me, this seems to be kind of off cycle and beyond the scope of what our initial intent was on this. And, as you guys know, a lot of people, especially in tech, got laid off. And so our local economy has been great. We saw a failure of two major local banks, Silicon Valley and First Republic. And so I just wonder what kind of message is sending to the people here that we're giving additional time off, paid time off, while people here have lost their jobs. This doesn't seem appropriate to me. That's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Byrd.
Yes, so I did want to follow up on the point that Councilmember Tanaka just made about not so much that we should not consider an additional holiday, but whether this needs to be folded into labor negotiations as opposed to granting unilaterally. When we have our total compensation package, it looks at the number of paid holidays. And so if we're moving toward additional compensation toward another paid holiday, it seems that it would be appropriate to refer that into the next labor negotiation. I support the concept of Juneteenth being a prospective paid holiday, but I don't think that we want to have that outside of the broader discussion with our workforce. And so I don't know if staff has any thoughts on that.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Burt. That's actually the adjustment that I was going to ask once the council was done with their deliberation. So item 3 might be restated as direct staff to include consideration of Juneteenth as a paid holiday as part of its next round of contract negotiations through the meet and confer process.
Sorry, yeah, and I thought based on using the staff recommendation that language was going to be included. So I'm glad we were able to make sure that that's explicit because that was intended.
Great.
Seconder agreed. Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
And thanks. And then just a couple of additional aside thoughts. One is in the recognition of Indigenous people, we've in recent years had a broader tendency to have acknowledgement of the really the genocide that occurred in our nation and in our state, but far less in terms of substantive actions that really are impactful for Indigenous people. And one of the things that I've been interested in and have seen just recently additional movement on is the state and potentially other agencies looking at ways in which to embrace and bring in as partners Indigenous people in land stewardship. And we're already having recent movements at the state level on that. I think this is something that government at different levels should be looking at. And I think it's a really appropriate way in which we go from what too often is seems like hollow words into actually substantive action. And how we do that, I'm not sure. But I think the first step is begin to recognize that it is a direction that we would like to explore and have engagement with appropriate representatives of Indigenous populations who are locally trying to have tribal recognition as well, which is something that the city could consider how we might support that initiative. And I see, you know, we had under the consent calendar one of the contracts for parkland maintenance is a really great one with grassroots ecology for restoration in Foothills Park and I believe our other natural preserves, and whether that is a way in which we might further engage local Indigenous people is something that I've been interested in, and it might be something worth exploring. We also have the most significant Indigenous peoples event locally is the annual Stanford Powwow, which is a multi-day event that is led by the Stanford, I've forgotten the name of the Stanford student organization that leads that, along with other partners, the Haas Center and otherwise. And that's a Stanford event, but it is hundreds of yards from Palo Alto, and we've never, as a community, to my knowledge, actively supported that event. And so if we're looking at doing more than doing something in name only, that's another way that I'd be interested in. Perhaps these are things that we can informally ask the HRC to explore. And then lastly, if we go forward and have a separate recognition for Dolores Huerta, I think we may want to, on the date that the year and the date that we initiate that, see if there is a way to work with others and perhaps with our partners in East Palo Alto, and actually invite Dolores Huerta for a real recognition. So those are just a few additional thoughts.
Councilmember Vinker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd originally put on my light to suggest the same language change in item 3 and the reference to the labor negotiations that Councilmember Burt mentioned. But I also have some additional thoughts. You know, I think with respect to Councilmember Tanaka's comments and Councilmember Lowing's, I do respect the concerns about the cost and the city services, but I do think that when we look at the numbers of holidays that other cities in our area have, especially when counting floating, and it's 12 to 17, I think was the range. We talk a lot about wanting to be competitive. We do have restricted budgets, so this is something we can do. Perhaps if the labor negotiations prove it out that it's something desirable. So I think that, that's a countervailing concern, and argues in favor of adding this holiday. So I do support that, as mentioned in my first round of comments. And I very much like many of the suggestions that Councilmember Burt just made, and including the comments about celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. And I think that in addition to the wonderful things you mentioned, we can learn a lot from other parts of the country, because there were various tribes and Indigenous First Peoples in different parts of our country, and I think they are acknowledged and celebrated in a variety of ways. And I know I spoke recently with the mayor of our sibling city, Bloomington, and in Indiana, and it was interesting to hear what they did. So I think it's something that I second in terms of let's explore it. Let's do something significant there. And I would hope the HRC would be interested in partnering with us on that exploration. Thank you.
Councilmember Lowing.
Yes, for clarification from staff, you estimated $735,000 fully staffed. That's per holiday, correct? Right. So if it were the 2 holidays, that's $1.5 million. And then the overtime for each one is probably 300,000-400,000. So that's over 2 million. It's just roughly 2.2 million. If we did 2.
Right. The numbers that are stated in the staff report are for 1 holiday. Obviously, the overtime hours would vary, so we didn't include those estimates. And ultimately, as identified in the staff report, the loss is truly the productivity time.
The loss is what was the last
The
part?
productivity time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's productivity, but also the backfill for police and fire and all that we need staffing.
That would be included in your normal cost because they are staffed 24/7 regardless of a holiday. So that's part of that cost of a holiday.
Okay, well, anyway, I just want everybody to understand that.
Yes, it is.
735 per holiday plus the backfill. So I just keep thinking we left a lot of things in the parking lot in the budget rounds that we really wanted to do. And we have given significant raises, which I am totally supportive of. So this is a big number. And I do think, to use Councilmember Tanaka's actual phrase, that this is out of cycle, as we've just discussed. So my question is, why do we even have to consider number 3 at all at this point, given that in any negotiation 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to have a dozen or 15 major things that you discuss. And if the sense is that you come back to us and say, what's really important for this group is, this particular holiday, we could just address it at that time. It just seems like we're making almost a recommendation or close to a decision a couple years in advance. So can you give me clarity on how that's particularly helpful or not right now?
Sure. And Director Blanche can also help round out any additional details. So our first contract will end in December of 2024. So we will actually be in contract negotiations probably within the next 7 months with our largest bargaining unit. And then other contracts term June of 2025. So we would use this as direction as we prepare for those negotiations to consider that as a paid holiday as we enter into this next round.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah. So again, I find myself pre-aligned with Councilmember Lowing on this. We gave really very generous just recently, like a few months ago, in some cases, double-digit raises to our employee groups. And we looked at nearby cities. We looked at how many paid holidays they were. They staff did an amazing job in looking at all the comp, and we are not under comping, or our employees are not getting less benefits than others. And as was mentioned, this is upwards of $2+ million of cost. And when we allocate funds, especially, it's not like we had like a bonanza this year and we don't know what to do with the money. We actually are dipping into a budget stabilization reserves. I think it was what, $7-8 million or something like that. So another 2.2 is a lot. So I'd like to ask the mayor at the time for the vote. I can't vote for 3 right now. It doesn't make sense. I think it ties our hands, probably not my hands because I won't be on council, but whoever is going to be on council for the next round of negotiations. I think we want that flexibility. So I would ask that we split out 3 for the vote.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lescott James.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to clarify because I think we've said a couple of things here recently. 1 holiday paid versus 2. I know Councilmember Long, you're making the point about the cost of the individual holiday, around $735,000 spent on staff who will be recognizing the holiday. I think we're only looking at 1 holiday though. So 735, but not the times 2. Okay. To speak to why Juneteenth now, I'm reminded that the state of Arizona was the last to recognize Martin Luther King Day. And it just became this thing like, what are you waiting for and why? And when we look around our California, I believe there are a lot of municipalities that have recognized Juneteenth. And as we sat here on Monday, June 19th, 2023, and did our work as a city council, I was just struck by the fact that our staff were here and we were here, and the public was expected to come to public comment when it's a federal holiday. It just felt that we had missed the opportunity. And that is why I'm excited for us to play a bit of catch up on that and not wait 2 to 3 years to do what many, many have already decided is the right thing, which is to recognize a federal holiday, Juneteenth. I also appreciate the argument about the $735 of staff paid on a holiday when they're not here. It's a cost to the city. And yet I don't think we're terribly good at computing the cost of employee morale. The cost paid when in the sense of morale when one's employer doesn't recognize a holiday that so many other employers, both private and public, do. I've just done a quick search. Many corporations, local, are recognizing Juneteenth. So we get into this thing of why am I supposed to come to work when my kids' camp is closed or my own company is closed? It becomes a childcare matter when we don't align our holidays with federal holidays. So with respect to my colleagues who are making the argument of fiscal responsibility here, I think there's actually a greater cost to us in ways that are perhaps less easy to measure by not recognizing the holiday.
Councilmember Lowy.
Just one small response. In my mind, that's what the personal holiday is for. So I can still get off Juneteenth, which I should because I sat here that night on my anniversary, as you recall. So, but that's why I like the flexibility of the personal holiday for what's important to somebody.
Thank you. Can I ask, on this holiday, there's the overtime, but is there time and a half?
Our labor contracts do have different rates for paid holidays. It just depends on the contract.
So the 735,000 figure is not the complete amount. I mean, there could be more added to it, right? The cost could go even more.
Right, because as Councilmember Lowing stated, that cost is based what an approximate day, including base wages and our regular staffing levels are. So to the extent it's a paid holiday, which then means there are some holiday rates, it would be ultimately higher than that. We just wouldn't necessarily know depending on the staff that were there.
Okay, and so I just kind of want to, when I worked on the colleagues memo, one of the reasons was to obviously advance the race and equity matter, but also recognizing these dates of significance, especially to bring community and to increase community awareness, and for us to acknowledge all the struggles and accomplishment of the groups that have been fundamental to the development of Palo Alto as well as the American society, right? So I think on these dates that we call holidays or recognitions, I think there should be more educational awareness put towards it. If anything, I think the city school liaison committee could work with the schools in developing some kind of activity where the youth can learn more about these significant historical dates and so forth. But I do have concerns about, the increase, be it 735,000 or more. It does cause me some concern. So I do align myself with Councilmember Lowing as well as Tanaka on this matter. And so I don't see any other lights. So I'd ask also to have number 3 separate.
Actually, sorry, I have my virtual hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. It's really quick. Actually, I don't oppose having Juneteenth as a paid holiday, as long as we take a day from some other paid holiday. We're not adding additional one. So if we do that, I could vote for 3, but otherwise I can't support 3.
So do you want to make a friendly, see if you want to have an amendment made and see if the maker and the seconder would accept that?
Okay, sure. I don't think there's a votes for it, but we could try. So basically, just as I said, so change 3 to say as a paid holiday by moving the day from another paid holiday.
Are you suggesting a floater holiday that's already?
No, it could be, well, I mean, that's what I think Councilmember Lowing already says, that could be a floater holiday, which I also agree with. But if you want to make it a fixed holiday, then let's change it from another one of the 12 paid holidays that staff already gets.
Which one are you recommending then that we remove?
I'll let HRC, other people decide. I don't think we have to decide that today.
No, I won't accept that.
Okay, I don't know if there's a support for it, but I don't think we have the votes for it either. So it probably doesn't matter.
Well, I think we just separate number 3 out. All right, so we can vote on 1, 2, 4, and 5. Oh, Councilmember Tanaka, do you have your hand up still?
Sorry, first I forgot to take it down.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Mayor Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott-Haynes,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stone.
Yes.
Motion carries for 1, 2, 4, and 5.
Thank you. And now we can vote on 3.
Councilmember Tanaka,
No.
Councilmember Lithcott-Haynes,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Mayor Ku,
No.
Councilmember Lowing,
No.
Councilmember Burt.
Yes.
Motion carries 4 to 3.
Thank you. Thank you again to Vice Chair Eberly for being here tonight, and to Ms. van der Swag. Thank you. And please let the commission know that we're very grateful for all the work that you did and will continue to do.
We will. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Now we move to item number 13, which is it's a proposed amendments to Palo Alto Municipal Code Title 18 to facilitate the implementation of green building standards, including noise standards and placement of obstructions within garages and exterior setback encroachments for electrification equipment such as heat pumps, energy storage systems, and electric vehicle charging stations. And also to Title IX, to facilitate the installation of electrification equipment for residential development as recommended by the Planning and Transportation Commission. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, City Council.
Excuse me, may I just make a comment before we begin?
Sure.
Yes, I'd like to disclose that I have a personal matter before the Planning Department related to electrification equipment in my personal residence, so I'm going to recuse myself from this item.
Thank you. Does Councilmember Lifka Hames have to stay and adjourn with us, or?
Yes, so,
so
no. So she does need to leave the dais now, and it's at her discretion whether she returns to adjourn the meeting or says goodnight.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Mayor and City Council. Jonathan Late, Director for Planning and Development Services. I'm at the table here with Amy French, our Chief Planning Official. We have a brief presentation for you this evening. Next slide, please. So I think the council and community, of course, are aware of the City Council's interest to advance its sustainability and carbon reduction goals. The ordinance that's before you this evening attempts to facilitate the installation of electrification equipment by amending the zoning code to allow for encroachments into required setbacks where they previously would not have been allowed, and to encroach into interior garage spaces, carports that previously would not have been permitted. The table that's on the slide shows provides some specifics to those encroachments in the zoning code, but there's a companion piece to this as well, where we are amending the noise ordinance, and the noise ordinance is being amended so that we can again facilitate the issuance of permits to allow heat pumps and other electrification equipment to occur without city staff having to require noise study reports or to understand what the existing ambient noise levels are to review equipment and have it installed on the property. And so we've come up with this concept of presumed compliance, that if a particular piece of electrification equipment met this standard, we would not ask for any additional information from the contractor or resident who is trying to install this equipment. There are provisions in the ordinance that's before you that would allow for the director to come up with administrative regulations to further advance the interests of this ordinance. But then there's also an opportunity for somebody to seek relief through the housing exception home improvement process that we have, the home improvement exception process in the code. Next slide, please. As noted in our packet, based on empirical data that our noise consultant has selected over time, there is a difference in ambient noise in different parts of the city. And there's a recommendation that the Foothill Expressway be used as a boundary to delineate where we would have equipment meet a 50 dB level and to the west a 40 dB level, and that is depicted on this map before you. Next slide, please. And then this is a table from the ordinance that illustrates the setbacks for presumed compliance. If electrification equipment met that decibel rating and was set back the distance specified, it would be considered compliant with our local standards and not require further analysis or review. On the lower left of the chart, you can see some of the standards that are employed in other jurisdictions that helped inform our process, but did not establish that standard that we are recommending, again, which was largely based on empirical data that our noise consultant has collected already. Next slide, please. Now, we have received public input, and as we noted in the packet, and as we've we'll reiterate here again tonight, there is this balance that we're trying to achieve between trying to advance electrification equipment and help achieve our sustainability and climate action goals with the expectation for the quiet enjoyment of residential properties. And so we have some interest from commenters that our standard may not go far enough to provide for incentives for heat pumps in particular in required yards in proximity to property lines. And so this ultimately is a policy question for the city council to decide how to strike that balance. We believe we've come up with a reasonable standard in the ordinance, but we will acknowledge, as we have in the staff report, that there could be some room for adjustment there. This isn't as precise a science for determining distances from noise equipment as one might think, given the science of noise, but noise travels in unusual ways, and people's perception of noise can be different from person to person. I'll also note, as this came up at the Planning and Transportation Commission, that noise measurements are typically measured in meter increments, and we have setbacks that are measured in feet. And so for simplicity and trying to ease the administrative process of approving these, we've had to make some assumptions or adjustments. And as noted in the staff report, that table that's in the ordinance did have some decimal points of setbacks, 4.2 feet or something along those lines. That's just not a practical way for us to do our review, to have that level of precision on something that has some variability in its placement. So acknowledging that and the public comments that we've received from the community, I could say as a part of this presentation that staff would be comfortable if the council were interested in making an adjustment of 3 dB at the property line to go from 43 dB in the one area, if the council were inclined to want to adjust those standards, or up to 53 in the area east of that boundary. Council may want to go further, and we at staff would begin to get a little bit uncomfortable at 5 dB, but that's an area for the council to exercise its discretion. And we've talked about what 5 dB is, and we have our consultant who's available to help answer those questions as well. If the city council wanted to go beyond 5 dB in its adjustments, we would strongly encourage the council to approve the ordinance that's before you with the limits that you felt were appropriate. But if they went above 5 dB or beyond 5 dBA, that we would ask that you remand some further study back so that we can have an informed discussion about that with the community and perhaps engage the PTC again in that process. So that should give you a sense for levels of threshold of comfort at staff before we begin the council's deliberation. Okay, and with that, our recommendation is to adopt the ordinance that's before you. I will end my presentation and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Why don't we go to public comments first? And again, Madam Clerk will stop after the completion of the first commenter. Thank you.
Our first speaker is Glenn G.
Good evening. My name is Glenn Garfinkel. I'm the co-chair of the Climate Reality Project.
Will you speak into the mic?
Okay. My name is Glenn Garfinkel. I'm co-chair of the Climate Reality Project Silicon Valley chapter. I live in San Jose. Concerning the proposed ordinance, while we applaud the minimum setback of 3 feet for heat pumps, we believe the proposed ordinance is unnecessarily restrictive in its noise limits. In particular, side yard placement of heat pumps is a preferred location for many homeowners. And we believe the ordinance should be modified to strike a more reasonable balance between the noise concerns, available products, and our climate goals. We believe the current ordinance would severely limit or completely prevent heat pump placement in side yards. We have 3 areas of concern in the ordinance. First, it does not make any accommodations for inverter type heat pumps, which generally operate at conditions much quieter than their dBA noise value, which by definition is the worst case noise value. Inverter heat pumps have variable speed fans and compressors and rarely operate at 100% speed. Non-inverter single speed heat pumps, on the other hand, are either 100% on or 100% off. While a non-inverter heat pump regulates building temperature by toggling on and off as needed to bring the average temperature into target, inverter heat pumps vary heating and cooling delivery to the building by continuously modulating the speed of the fans in the heat pumps to match the load, and normally operate well under 100%, which is their capacity. At reduced speeds, inverter heat pumps can easily be 5 dB down in noise or more. Night mode, for example, and reduced fan speeds are features in some heat pumps that are put there explicitly to reduce the noise. So that mechanism works and is known to work, and some manufacturers take advantage of it. Our second area of concern pertains to noise levels, even for single speed heat pumps. While the ordinance is a little confusing to us regarding whether it intends to set a 50 dB or a 56 dB limit at the property line in the 50 dB areas, that is to the east of Foothill Expressway, we note a few following observations. Normal speech is measured at around 60 dB. So that's one comparison point. And cabin noise in a moving vehicle will typically be between 65 and 70 dB. And I can confirm that. I actually measured in my drive up here from San Jose tonight.
Your time is up. Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Hamilton H.
I support staff's proposed electrification and noise ordinance changes that passed the PTC 7-0. These enable more homes in Palo Alto to convert their gas, heating, and cars to run 100% on Palo Alto municipal utility renewable electricity. Staff has thoughtfully crafted an ordinance that allows us to convert our gas to electricity while really minimizing neighborhood ambient noise, and in some cases actually lowering it compared to what is currently allowed in practice. The proposed changes will just enable myself to install an electric HVAC heat pump that I submitted a permit for a year ago. Although a lot of folks want to place the electric heat pump in their side yard, the proposed ordinance still makes it very difficult because you really need 55 and ideally 56 dBA at 4 feet. And to enable this, unfortunately, the proposed ordinance only allows 52 dB at 4 feet. A good example is my neighbor, who even with this ordinance, as written, cannot place a heat pump in the desired side yard because he needs 3 more decibels to do so. Thus, I suggest the council enable more residents to be able to place a heat pump HVAC in their side yard by making a small change. Grant a 3 dBA bonus for table 1, column 2, the urban area, in section 91030 at the property line. Usually there's going to be, and I have that in text I've emailed you, usually there's going to be a fence there, and usually it's a variable speed fan, although Director Late suggested not including those 2 caveats because he wants to keep the permitting simple, which I support. Although, do keep in mind that it's higher than surrounding cities. Los Altos allows 64 decibels at 6 feet from the property line with a single speed air conditioning unit. Whereas my proposed change would still be 8 decibels less than Los Altos. I would strongly recommend against going higher than 3 or 4 decibels above what staff proposes, as you would likely get some noise complaints. Regardless, please pass the changes that staff has put in front of you as we've waited 10 months since the PTC initially passed this for it to make it to council. Without this ordinance, many Palo Altans will continue to rely on gas heating and traditional loud air conditioners. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Albert H.
Whoops, that ain't gonna work. Sorry, I want a timer for myself. My name's Al Henning, and I am the neighbor that Hamilton referred to. I live near Duveneck School. Our house was built in 1947. So I believe, especially in the area of Duveneck, almost all of the houses have relatively smaller lots and with setbacks that are, because of that legacy factor, that are small. So our side yard setback on one side is 6 feet, on the other side, and it's 10 feet, and that includes a driveway. So we have recently put in, using the city's program, a heat pump hot water heater, which is working great, and we thank the city for that. We thank staff for all of its recommendations that led to that program. We recently completed the installation of a rooftop solar system through SunPower and not using any city program. So basically, like Hamilton said, I completely agree with the direction this is going. I completely agree with the ordinance as it's been presented, except for the discrepancy in the sound. So our next personal step for our home systems is to put in a heat pump, electric heat pump HVAC system. And given the side yard that we have, which is 6 feet, we'd like to put in a minimal footprint, variable speed heat pump system. There is at present no such system that can fit in our side yard that will meet the current as given in the ordinance, as proposed in the ordinance, peak sound specification. The best that is out there is Mitsubishi with a peak sound of 55 dB. However, it's a variable speed system, and most of the time it's the total range is between 43 and 55 dB, and most of the time it's going to be running 50, 48, 47, somewhere in there. So an absolute limit is great, except it's not able to capture some of the complexities of what's going on. However, if you were to increase that upper limit 3 dB, then there's at least one manufacturer that we could go to that would meet our requirements, our personal requirements for energy efficiency, able to heat and cool our home, able to put it in the side yard, and basically do everything that we would like it to do and maintain a close relationship and a good relationship with our neighbors vis-a-vis the sound issues. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Bruce H.
Good evening, council members. Bruce Hodge from Carbon Free Palo Alto. We believe that the proposed revisions in the noise ordinance are too stringent for Palo Alto to meet Palo Alto's 80 by 30 climate goals. In residential areas in Palo Alto, many if not most side yards are 6 to 8 feet in depth and often provide the best location for outdoor heat pump condensers. We need solutions that will work in those narrow side yards. However, the current proposal would disallow side yard placement of the majority of the equipment available in many, if not most situations. In the more lenient 50 dBA zone, your equipment would need to be 50 dBA or less to be located 3 feet from the property line, which would be the case in the very common 6-foot side yard. With an 8-foot side yard, you'd be allowed equipment that emitted less than about 54 dBA. The list of available equipment that meets these standards is very small, especially for the 6-foot case. It's not clear that the creation of 2 arbitrary noise zones that mandate either 40 or 50 dBA at the property line is a step forward, since it's more stringent in some cases and less stringent in others compared to the current code. The revisions continue to put the onus on the building owner to conduct an expensive noise study instead of creating a citywide map of ambient noise levels. This would save thousands of dollars and make the noise ordinance implementation crystal clear, eliminate the arbitrary zones, and base the ordinance on actual conditions. In fact, the report never gives any actual ambient noise levels for any location in the city, making it difficult to ascertain both the motivation and the consequences of the proposed revisions. Anecdotal evidence suggests that in actual real-world conditions, inverter-based heat pump systems are very quiet the vast majority of the time. We suggest allowing 12 to 15 dBA above ambient noise levels at the property line for this technology and 8 dBA for other technologies compared to the 6 that's in the current proposal. So we believe that this proposal needs more supporting data and revisions to better support electrification of HVAC in Palo Alto. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Brett A.
That's Brett Anderson. Good evening, council members. This is a great effort. We are here trying to adjust our noise levels to meet our 80 by 30 goals. So that's the context for Palo Alto. And I just wanted to make one comment before some prepared comments about the presentation. So we're comparing ourselves to some other jurisdictions around here, but we have to make sure that those relate to our context, which is we have an aggressive decarbonization goal. And we're also looking at inverter technology specifically. So if those noise ordinances were made with those ideas in mind and have similar goals that when we do, then we should compare. But otherwise, I think we need to take our own path here. I was shopping for heat pumps for the last couple of years and told that I couldn't install one in my side yard because of the noise ordinance. And I see by this chart, the one I actually chose does fit barely into my side yard. I have an 8-foot side yard, so I'm one of the odd ones with the 8-foot setback. All the homes in our neighborhood are built right up to that setback, so that's where the walls start. I have a neighbor across the street that planned to put one in their side yard, but when the inspectors came, they said, nope, you got to put that in your front yard. So it went right next to their front door, a big, ugly inverter, right? Compressor rather, right in the front door. They had to screen it and put pushes, but it really messed up their entryway. So it's a really odd looking place. And it was a very nice addition that they put on their home. So this is kind of a serious deal. I think we need to address this side yard issue. And I think the levels that we have here just aren't appropriate for what's available there. When I was shopping, I would see a difference of about 10 dB between the traditional models, single speed, and the inverter models. And even that you can't compare because these inverter models are not running full blast, but for a short time period during the extreme changes in temperature. Mostly they're running, probably in the 30 to 70% range. So they're just a lot quieter than the traditional models. And their max noise level is rated about 10 dB below, just based on my anecdotal evidence. The averages that showed up in the report from the consultant seem to indicate that mid-50s is about the average or median. So that's what we should be shooting for a side yard implementation, a 6-foot side yard implementation, because that's the most common in Palo Alto. So that's where we're going to see it. And we're also looking at a community that has a significant portion of ambient noise levels above 60. So all of the corridor that I'm in, a mile from 101, according to the map that was provided in a previous documentation
Thank
from
you for your
staff.
comments. Your time is up. Our next speaker is Dashiell L.
Good evening. My name is Dashiell Leeds. I'm the Conservation Coordinator for the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. We support the intended goal of this ordinance to facilitate heat pump installations so that Palo Alto can meet its 80 by 30 climate goals. It does seem like some adjustments can be made. We share the concerns shared by the Climate Reality Project Silicon Valley chapter, Carbon Free Palo Alto, and other Palo Alto residents about the potential difficulties this ordinance could incur for folks who are trying to install heat pumps in their side yards. So we would support amending the ordinance language to increase the noise limits for side yard placement of heat pumps, particularly for inverter heat pumps. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Our next speaker is 7T.
Good evening, council members, and thank you so much for what you guys do. God, this must be boring for you all. Just thank you for your work. Sven Thiessen here at Project Green Home over on 314 Stanford Avenue, all electric since 2011. We have a single heat pump that creates the hot potable water and the water for the radiant floor. We weren't allowed to put, there was no even any question that we had to put our heat pump in the backyard, not in the side yard at all. I didn't even know that we could have done that. I want to not side, but God bless you guys again for doing this work and for staff. But as much as I want, perfect ambient quiet, I got teenagers. I know noise level, you guys probably do too. I stand with Bruce and Brett in their comments that while this is a good first start of a proposal, we need to be able to put this equipment in the side yards because it's for multiple reasons. And it seems like just making a few tweaks to this ordinance, which again is good. And I'm really glad you guys care, because it's what's very interesting when you compare a electric, say, leaf blower to a gasoline powered one, if we want to talk about noise levels, and 85, 90 plus dB for those gasoline ones versus 65 for the electric ones. And these heat pumps, again, are only going to get quieter over time as this keeps coming up. But right now we have a crisis on our hands and we want to meet those 80 by 30 goals. It can be done. And anytime you guys want to come over and look at and play with a working heat pump, you're welcome to do so at my house. Thank you for your good work. Again, there's some tweaking here that needs to be done to make this work. I'm looking at putting in an ADU for my mother-in-law, and I would really like to move our current heat pump, which we're already going to have to do, and put the one for the ADU and the one for the main house together, or even have a single unit that serves both. Thank you.
That concludes public comment on item 13.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll bring it back for council questions and comments. Councilmember Vinker.
I'm happy to start unless the chair of SCAP prefers to go first. Either way. Okay. Well, I am very, very glad to see this coming to council. Thank you, Director Late, and all staff for all the work you've done to bring this here. It is, as the public speakers have said, just really essential to our achieving our 80 by 30 goals, to which the city is very committed. And when our good residents try to help us by electrifying their homes, we need to do our best to get the barriers out of the way. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that as a air district director, that can't forget that in 4 years, if you're if your water heater conks out, you're going to have to get a heat pump anyway. And in 2029, I believe it is, if your HVAC conks out, you're going to have to get a heat pump. So for all of those reasons, it's terrific to have this before us tonight. And I want to thank the public speakers for being here. Glenn for coming all the way from San Jose. Appreciate that. And, I think that I concur with mostly what we've heard and what the staff has said. These are really important revisions, and modestly adjusting our setbacks and our noise limits just makes sense. So I think insofar as that goes, it's something that I hope we all support. But I also agree that we need to go a little further, and we need to help people actually buy and adopt what's becoming more mainstream technology with these inverter heat pumps that kick on at a high level, but then most of the time that they're on are at a much lower level. And so if we look at not just their peak and their maximum specs of noise, which is what's triggering, I think, a lot of the interference with these numbers, but look at sort of their average operation, that would just make a lot of sense. And I have some more specific comments, but let me ask a question, if I may, Director Late. In the staff report talks about the ordinance also includes a provision that allows louder noise producing equipment to be located closer to the property line if noise reduction strategies are used in compliance with the noise standard is verified with a noise study. And what I wanted to ask and perhaps suggest is, are the setbacks based on, well, let me back up. So many of us in our side yards have tall fences, and many of them are solid fences. And are those some of the things that could help with noise reduction? And are there some standards is there some standard amount where we know it's good enough that we wouldn't have to do a whole noise study? I mean, is that something you could have investigated or could investigate so we could make it easier for people with fences?
So I'll start, and I may lean on our noise consultant a little bit to further amplify this, but I will tell you that the ordinance itself does not contemplate barriers such as fences at the property line, which is why, we believe that there's some room to make some adjustments to the standards. How I don't want to get, I'm not qualified to speak about the movement of sound and how it's affected by walls or bouncing off of two-story buildings onto the neighbor's side. But those are things that we need to be aware of, and our consultant could certainly speak to that. And theoretically, because we don't have a specific case in front of us. So I guess the short answer is we have not contemplated those types of barriers or other sound mitigation as a part of these standards.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering if some of the more typical, pervasive ones, perhaps we could explore and have that be another way to allow slightly higher decibels without having to do a whole perimeter noise study, which could be expensive or turn some people off for things. So.
Yeah, we just wouldn't know how, if you're referring to a scenario at the section in the staff report that you referred to, where if you've got a different ambient level, that begins to sort of, we don't know what that we'd have to document that ambient level, and then take a look at the noise equipment to see what it would produce. And if we're allowing for a louder equipment, and how that might be mitigated either through some kind of sound attenuation offense or something else. Those are all things that are not like readily available to us. Like there's no correlation between, okay, you have a wall, it reduces your effective dB, this amount, your decibel level to this amount. So I think I hear what you're saying. It'd be nice to have a higher standard with, if there were these other elements in place. What I'm suggesting is it's difficult for us to understand that correlation in terms of an actual reduction of noise without a study.
Without a study?
Right.
Generally speaking, or case by case?
Case by case.
Okay, because I guess what I was hoping is it could be standard enough in certain circumstances that there could be the table as we see it. Perhaps we'll discuss a table with the inverter technology that has a different set of numbers. And then perhaps even a more generous number with some sort of standardized noise reduction that wouldn't trigger a case-by-case study. That's
Right.
what I was hoping. And I think what you're telling me is that would be too hard, or that doesn't seem like a great idea to you.
Yeah, I think it's probably a wonderful idea. I don't know that we have the ability to effectively respond to that. But let me ask and invite our consultant, Michael Thiel, to weigh in on the idea of is there a uniform way in which a property line wall or some kind of sound attenuation could be used to give us a number of, to determine compliance?
That was better stated. Thank you.
Mr. Thiel?
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I just wanted to, I guess, first off, touch on why noise barriers were not considered initially. There could be some situations where a resident has installed a heat pump in the side yard, and there may be a fence, but you might also have second-story bedrooms that would overlook that fence and look directly down onto that heat pump. So while fences are great at the ground level, we could estimate what we think a typical wood fence would provide in terms of noise reduction. Generally, it's on average about 3 to 5 decibels of noise reduction, but that's only in the shielded areas. So again, if you have a second-story residence or a bedroom that overlooks that barrier, it looks directly down onto that heat pump compressor, there's going to be no attenuation from that fence.
Okay, I think that's the case. Okay, I understand your point. All right, I have a few other comments, but I've run over my time, so I can wait for next round. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Burt.
Thank you. So first, I need to ask a question or two that I believe is probably answered in the ordinance, but I was overseas and not able to access through the city firewall my packet. So very basically, right now, the proposal is that we would be relying on manufacturer certified decibel levels, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And when we are looking at the impact of, so we've got a decibel level at the site of the heat pump, right? That's the way we're measuring it, or at a distance?
We're measuring the decibel level at the property line.
At the property line. So when we have side yard setbacks, and really this whole set of standards is to really respect a certain level of peace and tranquility of a neighbor. And we use our yards and we use our homes occasionally at different times with our windows open, but we don't use our side yards for our pleasure of our experience in our yards. And so I think that's, as I've thought that through, it's a fundamental flaw in what we're trying to address. We're trying to make sure people inside their homes or in their yards, the space that they use, are protected up to a certain level. But we don't use our side yards for that. And so I'll just put that out there as what I think is a flaw in the premise that we've had. What are we trying to accomplish? And we're not trying to accomplish active, peaceful use of our side yards, which is not what any of us do. I'll stand corrected if anybody hangs out in their 6-foot side yard. I never have. My neighbors don't. Okay. And then I really did want to zero in on the what Director Late had spoken about on the comfort level with adding, was it up to 5 dBs?
Yes, we get uncomfortable, but would tolerate.
And
understanding it's not our decision, but we would just want to study beyond that.
Well, and one of the things that I think might be an easier yet call at this time is that we have technologies, we know they're either inverter or they're not. And inverters are variable speed, basically, and for all the reasons that were stated. Maybe if I could ask, maybe through the chair, Bruce Hodge, a quick question. And I'm going to be out of time real quick. The question is, do you know what proportion of HVAC heat pumps for homes that are on the market approximately are going with inverters these days?
I don't know that number, but I do know that that is the coming wave of technology, because the inverter technology promises both quietness, which people want, and efficiency.
Do you think it's around half of them that are being installed have inverters today, or a fraction, or what?
Probably more than half would be my guess.
So thank you. So what I'm getting at is it simple to, because inverters really have a reduction in noise that is greater than that additional 5 decibel on average, is it an easier call to do what we might want to even incentivize and say, you get an extra 5 dBs if you use an inverter heat pump?
Thank you, council member. So yeah, that may be the other piece to that we've been trying to work through, and certainly appreciate your perspective on this, is we're presently issuing hot water heaters, including heat pump water heaters, through an online permit. You can go online and get your permit. Ideally, we are moving to a system where you could also get your heat pump furnace through an online portal and not have to have a transaction with us. That'll reduce the permit fees and make it instantaneous. Where we're concerned, and again, we haven't worked through all of this yet, is distinguishing between traditional equipment and inverters, and relying on the applicant to know that distinction and know how the regulations may apply differently for that technology. Our concern is it may be misinterpreted, a permit pulled, equipment installed, our inspector goes out there and it doesn't line up with, the regulations. And then we have that situation to sort of manage.
Well, there's only a limited number of suppliers that are on the market, more kind of every few months. But it seems to me that we could have a master list of products that are on the market, or a list of ones that we know to have inverters, and if the onus would go on the applicant to establish that an additional piece of equipment has an inverter.
Yeah, thank you for that. And actually, the ordinance does allow for the director to develop administrative regulations to further that. So if the council did want to establish a different track for inverters, maybe that's the solution, as you mentioned, so that we would identify.
Good. I'll loop back in another round. Thanks.
Councilmember Lowing.
So I have a number of questions. My first one was already asked and answered from Councilmember Vinker, because I was hoping that was going to be a silver bullet there. But no, it isn't. I think certainly this inverter thing is something we should be looking at now, as in tonight, not wait for staff to do additional work on it. So I'm glad to see that you're open to that. I was also going to ask the question, which has basically just come up, which is clearly after these things are installed, is it going to be part of the building checklist when we do building inspections to make sure that the applicant has submitted XYZ and that's what they put up, as opposed to they submit an inverter and then they have something that's cheaper there? Or, I mean, are we going to check after they get put in that they put up what was in the permit?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, through the inspection process.
Right. Okay. So we have to go out there anyway. So we'll be able to check that out. I figured that was the case. So I concur. I think it's with Councilmember Byrd. I think it's incumbent upon us to have a list of at least a lot of, if not a comprehensive list, because we can then head off problems by having that on the website so that our residents can, make a choice there. Let's see. PTC has recommended the flexibility of the home improvement exception, which I think is great. But on packet page 591, the example that suggested if this proves too costly, then a resident may opt out. So what are the examples of what would be what could be done in this home improvement exception? What are the case studies of what would qualify that isn't in the normal ordinance?
Location criteria, placing louder equipment closer to the property line than the ordinance would provide. But perhaps through some sound mitigation documented through noise study, that would be possibly something that could be done through the home improvement exemption.
So that's a lot of detailed individual review, which I know that we'd rather stay away from, but.
Yeah, but we wanted to have some kind of a, an out for certain circumstances.
Yeah. No, I salute that. I just wondered how you were going to sort of manage it. So I concur with colleagues who have already spoken that at least these inverters, I think we could act on tonight. I'm open to some slight movement in the range of where our conservative planning commission is, that they would tolerate 4 dB. And I think there's some compelling arguments from the public that, we need to do that. We also have noted in here the correct human factor, that noise is not the same as everybody hears it. To some, a little bit of noise is a lot, and to others, they say, what noise? So I think that the dB is not so scientific that it's going to speak to, every neighbor's interpretation of that. And if we're in a range that you're comfortable with in the 4 dB, I would be comfortable with that as well. I think that's all I need to ask right now. Thanks.
Vice Mayor Stone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Glad to see this ordinance coming before us. We've heard frustrating stories from residents for a long time now about trying to be early adopters and help the city achieve our 80 by 30 goals, and the city process continues to frustrate that. I'm glad to see we're moving in the right direction. I have no issues with the zoning amendments. I'm in agreement with everything my colleagues have said tonight. I think the concern that we all have is around the noise, and I am curious. What is the process for if this equipment is installed and it goes through the streamlining process, and it for a neighbor who might measure the dB and they believe that it exceeds that limit, what's the process for that neighbor to be able to remedy that? I mean, is it a code enforcement issue? How does that process work?
Well, so I guess the concept of presumed compliance is that if they meet the standards and we have the manufacturer's specifications, then we would determine that it meets the code, and a neighbor who is irritated by that noise would not have a remedy to seek change or an adjustment through the city process. Now, between neighbors, maybe there's a resolution and things that could be resolved. The one caveat that I would add to that, though, is if the equipment is noticeably louder and there is perhaps something is wrong with the equipment, in that instance, we would certainly be able to follow that up through a code enforcement action and talk to the neighbor and say, hey, listen, you need to talk to your manufacturer. There's something wrong here.
Okay, great. That was my question. Because yes, sometimes we have the presumed compliance and a particular machine for whatever reason is louder than what's expected. That's helpful. For our noise consultant who's on, correct? I'm curious if we can have a better understanding. We're talking about these ranges of 3 dB for maybe 5 at the high end of what staff's comfortable with. But dB is such a strange kind of measurement, and one increase can be fairly significant. Can you address that a little bit more? Maybe give us some examples of real world examples that we'd be familiar with, what that actually means in the real world?
Sure, I can address that. Just for kind of rule of thumb comparisons, a sound level that's 3 dB higher than the baseline sound level is barely noticeable. It's a barely noticeable change. A sound level that's 5 dB higher is a clearly noticeable change. And a sound level that's 10 dB higher is perceived as a doubling of the sound. So hopefully that answers your question and gives you some comparative figures to work with.
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of also reinforces how strange this is. So 3 is imperceptible and 5 is?
It's noticeable. It's clearly noticeable.
Clearly noticeable.
Yeah.
I guess still trying to understand like what that means as far as, is that somebody playing the TV really loud next door? Is that someone cheering because McCaffrey just got his 4th touchdown? Sorry, I'm still excited about the game yesterday. What does this look like? I mean, can you give examples like that?
Well, I mean, maybe one, it's hard to give an example for the smaller changes, the 3 dB. Okay, well, let's think about this. I don't know if you're as old as I am, but when I went to school, I had a hearing test and they played sounds which you would raise your finger at, when you heard a change. So maybe you could think of that example as the barely noticeable difference. On the other hand, a 10 decibel increase in noise levels, if we're talking about between 40 dBA and 50 dBA, that difference could be characterized as kind of a nighttime noise level at 40 dBA versus a daytime noise level at 50 dBA when there's more traffic present, when there's more activity. So maybe you could think about it that way. Just envision standing outside your house during the day versus at night. Those noise levels are probably about 10 dB different.
Okay, thank you. Madam Mayor, I've got one more question, but I am over time. Should I finish up?
Finish up, please.
Great. Curious. I don't think this exists in our noise ordinance, but trying to think out of the box a little bit for increased flexibility. I was thinking when Mr. Hitchings was explaining his positive relationship with his neighbor made me think about consent letters that we have now for parklets. Is there any kind of precedent that we see in other cities on how they handle this, that maybe increased exception could be allowed if you have a consent agreement from the neighboring property that would be impacted by a dB that's higher than what would be allowed under our standards?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that process. Certainly not in our code, except for the one example that you've noted with parklets and a different topic. Not aware of it from other jurisdictions. I would note it begins to complicate things too from a permitting process, and that's one of the things that we're hearing clearly from the community is we want to get out of the way of the installation of these facilities. So if we're having to look at consent letters and that, the other component of it is property sell, and so while the current property owner may be fine with it, another property owner could have an objection to it, and maybe that gets recorded into the deed. But again, now we're talking about so many different layers of regulation. I'd rather us just come with a standard, I think would be the better way to go.
Fair enough. So like the direction we're going, I'm open to modifying that decibel limit a little more to be able to encourage more adoption. Thank you.
Councilmember Vinker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm also like where this discussion is going. So when I spoke initially and I talked about hopefully the column as you have it in the staff report and another column if you're using inverter technology, which then I heard my colleagues also speak about. So this is good. And I guess what I'd liked, I mean, it's interesting because Mr. Hitchings mentioned just adding the 3 dBAs, and I'm thinking we could do that. It seems pretty easily to encourage the inverter technology because that is the almost imperceptible level. But I guess what I also want to note is that some of the public commenters have talked about that many of the available heat pump with inverter technology have a existing decibel, a sound level of 56 to 58 or 59. So we would actually have to go farther than that to accommodate a lot of these existing options on the market. I don't think we're prepared to do that tonight, but I would love to see us explore that given this lower typical operating sound level. The peak or maximum is rarely experienced, and I know we have to look at that a little more aggressively, but when Councilmember Burt was talking about the side yards and use of them and noise, I was thinking about the fact that my bedroom window actually looks right out at our side yard, which backs up to the neighbor's driveway, which is where their 2 young children come out every morning. And I hear them, and I don't know how many decibels that is, but it's probably more than a heat pump. So I think that we could, since it is episodic, they're charming, they're darling, and I don't mind them because it doesn't go on all day, right? And so perhaps something that could be the same for a short-lived, high max peak sound level for a heat pump, but I don't think we can answer that question tonight. So I guess what I would like to see is if that could be explored. And so Director Late, do you want to talk about what it would take and if that's possible? I know you have a heavy workload, but I'm hoping it's not too extreme to explore doing that.
And maybe just to understand what the ask is how does inverter heat pump technology, sort of what's the average decibel rating?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like to look at use profiles
Yeah.
and to see, because I think, as I understand it, it's at that higher level when you're trying to achieve the desired temperature in the house, heat it up, cool it down.
Mhm.
But once it hits that, to maintain it, it rarely would need to go back up to that peak speed and thus noise.
Yes, so I have the same understanding as you. I don't know of any data that has sort of tracked that noise profile for heat pump water heaters. I don't believe we heard any in the public testimony today. There's been some conversations about anecdotal information. I'll ask our consultant, and I believe I already know the answer to this, if he's got any data about that. So it's a research, and it's researching something that may not have been published. And I think it's also variable depending on individual use of heat pumps and what temperature you're trying to achieve and what is the temperature that's outside. It could vary from season to season. I think, frankly, it's a difficult ask. Not a simple solution for staff to engage in that level of technical analysis for heat pump inverters to find that noise profile. That's my initial reaction to it. And let me ask my consultant to see if I'm wrong. Mr. Thiel?
No, Jonathan. what you had described there is exactly correct. The manufacturers present the maximum noise level data. It's measured following a methodology. And that's how all the data is presented. Now, there is variation in the noise levels, and that depends on the usage and a lot of different factors. But because of that variability, it'd be very difficult to, assign some kind of allowance just because of an inverter heat pump.
Let me ask it slightly differently. Is there anyone that looks at the average decibels over the course of a month or a year? Or do you have a feel for it being around these that, it's only, a couple times a day for 10 minutes a day, or is it much more than that? I mean, did you have any feel for how often? Because we're highly constrained by these peaks. And if they're not that significant, we shouldn't be so constrained, is why I'm asking.
Yes. There are different ways of measuring sound. There are maximum noise levels that can be measured. There are average noise levels that can be measured. There's daily average noise levels that can be measured. But typically, a resident is going to react. And again, this is a standard that allows people to enjoy their property day or night. And people are going to react in the middle of the night to the sound that they hear, not the average sound. So I think that's one consideration there. The one sound of that piece of equipment ramping up in the middle of the night might be what wakes them up and they can't go back to sleep.
Those are certainly policy considerations, but I'm curious as a sound expert whether or not the data is available for the average time periods over the course of a day, a month, or a year.
Not from the manufacturer, no.
Okay, thank you. I had one more question, Madam Mayor, may I ask it? There was also a suggestion about certain parts of the city and addresses where the ambient noise is known to be significantly above the 50 decibel level, and the suggestion that perhaps there be a map so it could be realized more easily by those who live in these places and would seek to install a heat pump. Is that doable?
So we have a map in our comprehensive plan that shows, I would say, broad contours of noise that draws points between places of the city to give an estimate of what the ambient noise is. It's that too is, based on, well, actually, this is a question I would need to find out. What are those, and maybe Ms. French knows, those CNL noise contours, are they based on an average 24-hour noise?
That's correct, not ambient, not measured ambient per the way the code says to measure it.
So it averages noise over a 24-hour period. And so at nighttime, your ambient temperature or your ambient noise would be expected to be quieter than the CNL contours that we have on our map. I read that comment as well, and I think it is an extensive and expensive effort for the city to begin to try to identify, data at that level where an individual homeowner wants to install a heat pump. It's going to be, we would either have to agree that it's going to have a lot of imprecise information on it, or we'd have to spend a lot of time and money to find out how noise is, throughout the city.
So we don't have known data now by building or that sort of?
So no, not by building, no. We have, again, and we can show you a map that has these what I'll call gross, contour lines that provide more of a scale to noise, or, sort of a broad understanding of how noise is going to be louder at the commercial corridors near the freeway. But at the level of neighbor to neighbor, I would be really hesitant to rely on that kind of mapping.
Okay, understood. Thank you. All my questions at the moment. I was contemplating making a motion, but why don't I let others talk first? Thank you.
Councilmember Burt.
Yeah, thanks. So subsequent to my questions, I appreciate the question that the vice mayor got answered, which was really that at 3 decibels, it's barely detectable change, 5, it's modestly. And so I think on that basis, I'd like to move the staff recommendation with the following modification, which is that the that we increase the base noise standards by 3 decibels across for all heat pumps and by 5 decibels for heat pumps with inverters. And then I'd also, well, let me just ask Director Late, there are some follow-up things for future evaluation that would not be part of this ordinance, but that I'd like to give guidance for staff on kind of the next iteration of refinements on this. Is that something that would be best just put in, maybe direct staff to evaluate over the next year or something like that? What would be a good way to do this?
So some things, so yes, it'd be fine to include it. I would say if you're heading in the direction of preparing this list of qualifying equipment, that's something that we could do as an ongoing basis, starting as soon as we can. If it's, do the kind of analysis that we heard your colleague speak to.
Yeah, I got it. So let me.
That's a work plan
in the
item.
interest of time, let me put out there what it is, then you can balk at what looks like a problem. I should have actually under this first change, it would be 5 decibels for heat pumps with inverters, and that following the 5 decibels for inverters, and language to the effect, and that the director would develop a list of qualified inverter equipment. And then under 2, it would be request staff to evaluate the following for future refinements to the ordinance. And please feel free to correct this language as we go along. I'm on Ukrainian time at the moment. First, attenuation, the sound attenuations. Second, a streamline site-specific testing protocol for non-standard or equipment. So this might include if you attenuate the sound, how do you test it? And then lastly, this really directing it for more immediate, but to just make sure that the development center gets this information disseminated to anybody who's looking at heat pumps or other HVAC equipment, and to do that ASAP. Any feedback on any of those?
I guess I'd like a little more clarity on the second item that you noted, which was the streamlining site-specific testing protocol for non-standard equipment. and how that gets tested.
Yeah, so if somebody wanted to have a heat pump, say that was rated, one of the inverter units, it's rated above what we would currently permit. But they can attenuate that, and I'm not thinking so much fences, but just a sound box that by necessity it has to have adequate airflow for a heat pump, but you can still attenuate sound with an enclosure or partial enclosure that I think would actually be pretty significant. So how do we know that that sound's been attenuated well enough?
Yeah, so I think the ordinance already contemplates that and allows for either through the home improvement process, or if you're in an area of higher ambient noise, there are some paths to address that. And, you know, we have those as a sort of a fail safe because it's not so streamlined, because we have to get a consultant to do an ambient report and understand how the noise measures at a specific level. But I believe the first part of your recommendation with the adjustment to the DBAs will probably go a long way to mitigate the need for any of that going forward. So I guess that's my.
So we have a protocol, and I guess the question is it so onerous that it will really be a barrier? Or is there a way that we could streamline that, not have to have a full-on report?
I mean, I wish there were, but we're trying to understand noise at a very localized area based on existing location of walls and other barriers.
How about if I modify it to say, evaluate the potential for a streamlined testing, so that we look toward that and see if we can come up with a solution. Sure. Okay.
And then with sound attenuation, the first one that you noted is again, how might sound be attenuated by existing fences or the sound? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what do we call it? Not boxes, but enclosures. Partial enclosures.
So again, I think that is again related to that other one.
Yeah, it is.
And then for the third one about the information, we would certainly do that. So I guess I hear what you're saying, and I think we can accommodate that. Either the ordinance already accommodates it, or we will be doing that as part of our public engagement strategy.
Okay. So if you're good with it, I'd like to go ahead and just leave it in there, if for no other reason as to accentuate it.
What is A?
So A was evaluate allowing units with higher dB ratings provided that higher manufacturer dB ratings provided that the sound is attenuated. Meaning that the equipment may put out a sound, but the neighbor doesn't hear it.
And B is it also evaluate the streamline? Is it also evaluate?
I heard explore.
Or explore, I'm sorry.
Or explore, okay.
And I do think that A is covered in the ordinance, but we're putting it in here for further amplification. There's no, again, if somebody did want to put a louder unit in.
We want to make this louder in the ordinance.
That perfectly fine. I just want to make sure in terms of expectations, are we as staff coming back to the council with something? But it sounds like not the way I'm reading number 2 at this moment, because it's covered. We're just amplifying it.
Good. Okay.
I'll second it if you're ready for a second.
And I don't need to speak to it any further, except to say I think we're pointing in the right direction, and hopefully this is a good first cut, and we'll refine it going forward.
Councilmember Vinker.
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly on my second, on 2A there. Yes, it's in the statute or in the proposed ordinance, but that's why I was trying to get the fence to see if we could have a standardized way to avoid that whole, measuring, figuring it out and doing all the customized stuff to make it even easier. But I will go with this. And I'm still concerned about the 59, 58 decibel ones that this may not cover, but if we can do the 3 and 5 tonight, let's do it and then continue the conversation.
Thank you. And I also want to remind that, we're talking about fences, right? But this goes beyond single family homes. It's also for multi-residentials and multi-families, low density. So potential looking out over your window at something like this and the noise moving upward is a possibility. But I do want to thank staff and for the Planning and Transportation Commission for looking into this and working on developing a ordinance that will limit noise and its impacts. I don't see any other lights. Councilmember Tanaka, no hand. Okay. So staff, is the motion okay?
Yeah, so that's clear to staff. One is the most actionable item with respect to the change to the ordinance. And we've spoken to the 2 before, so I think we're good to go.
And one can move forward after the second reading?
It will be, so the ordinance will come back to you in a couple of weeks with that change reflected in it.
I see. Okay. Very good. Madam Clerk, can take the vote.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Mayor Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames recused.
Yes, thank you. I forgot about that. Thank you. And this concludes item number 13, and we are adjourned. Thank you.